one of the cool things too about this particular year that I like, because I didn't know this before, but Brewington, he was actually recruited by Nebraska kind of last minute, and he said the reason why he didn't come was because he didn't know the guy, so he went to Northern Arizona first, right? But then ended up coming to Nebraska, and he was always had his eye on the school. So that's kind of cool because we ended up getting a guy who was developed by an FCS school, and now he's going to come play for us. And God willing, his injuries are all done. He says that he's going to play this year, so that's great. And then the other kid is a homegrown kid that's back who also played FCS, was Kevin Williams Jr. Right, and he's an Omaha kid. I'm sure you probably know his family. You've probably been around him a little bit, and so those are two guys that wanted to be Nebraska kids that are Nebraska kids now, right? And they've got it right. And that's going to be, for me, that's the kind of culture that I like seeing built already, right? Like, isn't that kind of what we're talking about, right? So, and I'm just putting this together, and this is just me, kind of looking at what we've got coming in, and I don't look at what we lose, because we're going to always lose guys, right? That's just going to be the way it happens, whether it's because of the system or because, like, the kid we lost today, apparently his parents are huge Oklahoma fans. Like, you can't compete with that, right? Like, he's probably been rooting for Oklahoma his whole life in reality. So now he's going to go play for Oklahoma. So, I mean, that's just one of those things that, when I start seeing the culture personally, and I'm really going to ask for your opinion here, I'm seeing a difference in the way that this team is approaching this year, especially with the new coaches. What's your opinion on that? Like, you've been a part of a winning program. So what are you seeing going on right now? I don't care about the last 4 years. What are you seeing right now?
Yeah, I see, guys that are looking at Nebraska more than they would have probably in the past. What it seems like, this is the hard part about being in Nebraska for me, though. From a media perspective, and we're all do different things in the media, including myself. Recruiting in Nebraska has always been blown up more than, especially in this past 10, 15 years. Like, every kid that's committed has always been the best kid ever in the country, right? So you don't really get a real view, because when a kid gets here and he's like, wait, this kid can't play, right? Like, all I heard was how great this kid was, and he's terrible, right? Like, so that's the hard part, is knowing where that line is at now, because there is so much excitement about the new coaches, the new players transferring in. How much of it is going to stick and be the truth? Like, how good are these kids really going to be when they get here? That's the hard part for me. So I'm always been, and especially lately, and especially the last 10 years, I've kind of adopted that I kind of turn my ears off in the off season. Like, I kind of don't pay attention to a lot of what's going on in the off season, because at the end of the day, for me, as a former player and alumni, all that matters is what happens on Saturday in September. That's what's going to tell me if what work was done in the off season, how much development was done, how much learning, how much the players bonded, what type of chemistry they have. You can't fake it on Saturday when the live bullets start flying. You can say anything you want to say in July and June and March and April when you're training, and you can make it all sound good and spin it. But in the fall, when it really starts going down, you can't fake it. So for me, I've kind of turned my ears off to a lot of the recruiting hype, and I couldn't really tell you a lot of kids that are coming in, and a lot of kids and where they come from, because for me, it's okay. Right now, it's prove it. For me.
Well, you were one of only 6 guys to play as a true freshman in '96. So, I mean, and that was, again, think of the time that you were at to play as a true freshman, especially on the D line. I mean, that's almost unheard of, right? But how about this? When you got recruited, see, when I used to pay attention to recruiting back in the mid 90s, it was just, I opened up a newspaper and, oh my gosh, it announced that we got some kid. I've never heard of him before. This is the first I've ever heard. And he's in our recruiting class. And that's how it worked back then. Now we know about kids coming out of the 8th grade, right? Assign yourself a star ranking coming out of high school. Would you have said you were a 3-star? Were you a 4-star? Were you a 5-star? I mean, you're a kid. No matter what the star was, you came in and played right away. And so this is the prove it point. But what were you as a recruit, do you think?
I've always thought I was just who the era of guys we played with, we always thought we were the best, right? Like we always thought we were the best players in the country, right? Coming in. So I would have loved to believe I was a 5-star. I probably would have been a 3-star just because of my height. And the area of the country I came from, I think that would have, from a recruiting and ranking standpoint, from the people who ever do that, I think that would have been the things that they would have held against me. I would have been probably a 3 or a 4-star, depending on what was going on. But in my mind, I've always been a 5-star, right? I've always been one of the best players on the field anytime that the whistle was blown.
I love
the best player at the position playing.
I love that answer. I mean, that's a 1990s answer, because the reality is a lot of those recruiting classes back then, and it's revisionist history where we come back and go, oh man, we just went into Florida and California and just, all these 5-stars. It wasn't like that. It was but Terry Connealy was a 8-man football player from Hyannis, Nebraska. And he'd be lining up next to Christian Peter from, New Jersey, but it was a hodgepodge of guys. But you get occasional 5-star Amon Greens and all that. But for the most part, you're bringing in kids that are 500-mile radius guys. Probably would have been, the quote unquote 3-stars, but they came in with 5-star mentalities, man. And again, and I think to what you said earlier, at the end of the day, who cares what star you were? You came in and you proved it, and you got on the field immediately. Didn't even redshirt. I mean, we need guys that have that kind of mentality coming in. I don't care what their ranking is. They just need to come in with the right mentality.
There's things that I've been told about, like my own recruiting, and that I didn't know until 5-10 years ago. I didn't know that I was like blue chip regional player of the year. Like I didn't know those things. Like I didn't know that, the ranking wise, I was, 9th best player in the Midwest, or I didn't know any of those things.
Yeah, I saw some Super Prep magazine. Super Prep magazine had you like number 9.
Yeah, so I didn't know those things growing up. Like the ranking didn't matter as much then as the offer. Now the ranking means more than the offer. And that's where the game has been flipped on its head. Is kids care more about the star than they care about the offer of what's going on. So it's now ranking is everything, and a lot of it is not real. There's a lot of stuff that goes on with the rankings that kids are getting ranked higher than kids. If you're from California, you're going to get a higher ranking than a kid from South Dakota. Just is what it is, because the competition level you play. You might not be a better player. In most cases, you're not. But it's because of where you're from and who you're around, and that gets your ranking boosted. And that's what happens to guys in Nebraska, is like they have to go out on these circuits and prove that they're just as good as everybody else because they're from Nebraska. If Zane Flores was in Texas, he'd be a top 5 quarterback in the country.
Yeah,
no doubt.
Harrison Phillips should have been in Nebraska. They ended up having to go out to California to get to camp.
Harrison Phillips, if he was coming out of Texas or Florida or California, would have been a 4 or 5-star athlete. But because of where we're at in the region, and because it's not the most populated place, and it's not historically the best football being played across the country by somebody that really doesn't know football or never played the game. That's the problem that bothers me. It's somebody that's ranking kids based off of region and what they look like in gym shorts instead of what they play like in pads. And there's a lot of gym short All-Americans that go around to these camps and make a name for themselves, but you never see them in pads doing much.
Yeah.
And so that's for me when it comes to recruiting now. I'm like, it's all fluff. It's a lot of fluff. It really is. And so that's why I don't really pay attention to this kid or that kid coming out of where they're coming out of, because a lot of it is fluff and it's blown out of proportion. And all these kids aren't great. There's a lot of 5-stars that are really 2-stars, and there's a lot of 2-stars that are probably 5-stars. And that's just the reality of it. And when you get to the NFL, you see that guys are coming from all over, Division IIs and FCS level, and they're becoming stars in the NFL. And it wasn't because they weren't stars in high school. It was because of where they grew up, or they hadn't hit a growth spurt yet. And so some guy, didn't know if they could be 250 when they were only 195. So it's a lot that goes into it that people should. It's fun. It's great to read. But I wouldn't put my life insurance on it. I would just tell you that. Like, I'm not going to put my family's future on recruiting,
Right.
and the truth behind recruiting. I'm not going to do that.
I mean, I just some of the words you've used tonight: not real, fluff, committable, not committable. I mean, so much of it is a game, and recruiting. It's a necessary evil. You got to recruit, obviously, but at the end of the day, I'm so in line with what you're saying. I don't get deep into, what's this kid? Is this kid committing that's coming here this weekend and all that? I mean, I go to these camps sometimes and I watch them and I'm like, this isn't even football. I mean, these guys are running around and they're great athletes. Don't get me wrong. And that's a nice catch and a nice throw, but I'm a full pad guy and practice guy. I mean, I want it, and you're not seeing a lot of that anymore either. So this is the get off my lawn. I'm the old guy, saying this stuff now. But
well, it is. There's a lot of that goes into now these camps. And we're no different. I'm not on a soapbox here. I've got guys that I feel like are great players that I meet, and I meet them in sweatpants, and I'm like, oh, I want to see you with pads on, like. And that's for us too. We don't really promote kids based on what we see in sweatpants. Sweatpants is what sweatpants gives us. Okay, put him on this list. Athletically, he's a Division II kid. He's a Division I kid. Potentially, he's this. Okay, coach, this is what we see athletically. We haven't seen him in pads, so we can't tell you if he's that, because a lot of kids look like Tarzan and play like Jane. That's just what it is. Like, there's a lot of kids that you get them in shorts, and they're the fastest kid on the field, and they jump the highest, and they run through walls, and they run through bags like madmen. And you put them in pads, and you're like, wait a minute, where'd this kid go? Like, this kid not tough at all. Like, the things that really matter in football, toughness and grit, you don't see that anymore when you put a lot of these kids in pads. So those kids, when we meet them and they're in sweats, we don't really put them on a list to say, hey, this kid's a no-brainer, till we see him in pads and we know what they can do in pads. But, we promote kids that deserve it. That's for sure.